Have you ever, been hit with a question that seems super simple on the surface, but then kind of rocks your world?
Oh, yeah. I know the feeling.
The other day, I was talking with a friend about that awful earthquake, you know the one? And he just casually asked, how could a good God let something like that happen? And honestly, I was speechless.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah.
That question's been around forever.
It really has. And it's something that Timothy Keller tackles head on in his book, The Reason for God. We're actually diving into chapter 2 today, and it's not just about intellectual arguments, but also how this whole question of suffering hits us on a gut level, you know?
Absolutely. It's personal.
Totally. And Keller, he illustrates this with a story about Hillary. She's an English major, and she's wrestling with this exact dilemma. For her, it's not just some theory, right? She's like, if God is all powerful and could stop suffering but doesn't, how can he be good? But then if he wants to stop it but can't, how can he be all powerful?
It's the classic conundrum. And the thing is, Keller doesn't try to dance around it. He presents her struggle as a totally valid, heart-wrenching objection.
Yeah.
It makes you think.
Yeah, it gets even more real with her boyfriend, Rob. He's not as interested in the intellectual debate. He's more focused on the personal impact. He's like, even if there is a God, if he allows this kind of suffering, how can anyone ever trust him? You know?
He's going right to the core.
Exactly. And it's like Keller saying, yeah, these aren't just abstract arguments. They cut to the heart of faith, of how we understand who God is.
Exactly. And this is where Keller brings in this really helpful analogy. It's from the philosopher Alvin Plantinga, and he calls them, get this, noseums.
No-see-ums. Okay, gotta admit you've lost me there. What are those?
Okay, so imagine you're in a tent, right? You're looking around for something obvious, like maybe you lost your dog.
Hmm.
If it's not in there, you can be pretty sure it's not hiding in the tent. But what about those tiny, tiny insects? So small you can barely see them, even if they're right there on your arm. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
It's like that with suffering, right? Just because we can't see a reason for it, the why behind it all, doesn't automatically mean there isn't one. Could just be that our perspective is limited.
We're so focused on what's right in front of us, we miss the bigger picture, how those no-see-ums, annoying as they might be, are part of this whole ecosystem we don't really grasp.
Exactly. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. Keller challenges us to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's way more going on than we can grasp in the moment. It's like trying to understand how a watch works by only looking at the second hand.
We might question the watchmaker, right? But what if there's this whole intricate mechanism at play that we're just not seeing?
That's it. So how does this connect to suffering, to our human experience? Well, Keller uses a story from the Bible, the story of Joseph.
Oh, yeah. Just.
And it's not just some Sunday school story. I mean, this is a story packed with betrayal, suffering, and then this completely unexpected twist of fate.
I mean, it's a wild ride, even for the Bible. Just in case you need a refresher, Joseph was his dad's favorite, and, well, let's face it, that never goes over well with siblings.
Nope.
So they were so jealous they actually sold him into slavery.
That's rough.
And it doesn't get any better for poor Joseph. He ends up in Egypt, gets falsely accused, and then thrown in prison. Talk about a run of bad luck.
But here's where it gets good. Through it all, Joseph, he grows. He develops this incredible wisdom and strength, and get this, he ends up becoming a powerful leader in Egypt.
And ultimately saves tons of lives, including, get this, the lives of his own brothers who betrayed him. It's wild.
Totally. And that's Keller's point. What seemed like meaningless suffering, even cruelty, turned out to be part of a much bigger, ultimately good plan, one that no one could have seen coming.
It's like those times in our own lives when we go through something we wouldn't wish on anyone, and then looking back, we're like, wow, that actually shaped me. Maybe it made us stronger or opened up a new opportunity, something we never could have imagined.
Yeah.
It's like those hardships, as awful as they were turning points, and they revealed a kind of strength or depth that we didn't even know we had.
And Keller, he even brings in some of his own experiences, right? He talks about battling cancer and his wife's struggle with Crohn's disease.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they both say, they wouldn't wish those experiences on anyone, obviously, but they also admit that those trials, they revealed a deeper faith, a more profound sense of empathy for others going through similar things.
It's like we don't always see the purpose when we're in the middle of something painful, you know? But maybe, just maybe, it is there, shaping us in ways we can't fully grasp at the time.
Right. And Keller, he tells another story about a man in his church who lost his sight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a terrible situation,
Wow.
a drug deal gone bad. And the man himself, He admitted that before he lost his sight, he was selfish, unkind, always blaming everyone else for his problem.
That's like he couldn't see. Literally.
Yeah. But then losing his physical sight, it's like it opened his spiritual eyes.
I get it.
He could suddenly see his own faults, take responsibility, and he started forming these real, genuine friendships for the first time in his life. Isn't that something?
It really is. It's like in each of these stories, there's this common thread. Suffering, even though it's never wanted or asked for, it ends up leading to growth, a deeper understanding of ourselves and even the world around us.
It's like it refines us, like you said, shows us what really matters.
It makes you wonder, if we can look back and see some kind of purpose in the painful things we've been through, couldn't there be purpose in even more of it than we realize?
Like, maybe, just maybe, from God's perspective, there are good reasons for it all, even if we can't see them in the moment.
Okay, but hold on. Let's say, for argument's sake, that we do accept there might be a bigger picture we don't see, that our perspective on suffering is limited. Does that mean we just, blindly accept whatever happens, just sweep the whole problem of suffering under the rug and say, well, God knows best?
It's not about blind acceptance, right? It's about approaching this whole thing with humility, recognizing that there might be more to the story than we can grasp. Like, what if a God who is big enough to be angry with for allowing suffering, what if he's also big enough to have reasons we can't even comprehend?
I see what you're saying. It's not about shutting down the questions, but wrestling with them, sitting with the mystery of it all. But it kind of raises another question, and it's a bit of a head scratcher. What if, and go with me on this, what if suffering, instead of disproving God, actually points toward him?
Now you're talking. That's where things take a really interesting turn. Keller brings in another voice here, C.S. Lewis,
Wait, C.S. Lewis, like the Narnia guy?
the one and only.
Hmm.
He was also a brilliant thinker, and you know what initially turned him away from God?
Suffering.
Bingo. But here's the twist. As he explored atheism, he realized that it didn't actually solve the problem of evil. If anything, it made it even more puzzling.
How so?
Well, he asked this really insightful question. He said, "My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?"
Wow, when you put it like that. It's like he's saying that our very outrage at suffering, at injustice, means there has to be some kind of standard, a measuring stick for good and evil that exists outside of it, outside of the natural world. So if there's no God, where does that standard come from?
Exactly. Lewis realized that if there's no God, no higher moral authority, then ideas like justice and injustice, they become totally subjective. Just personal preferences, like, liking pizza over tacos.
Yeah.
But deep down, we know it's more than that.
Right. Like when we see a news report about some horrible act of cruelty, our reaction isn't, well, that's just their opinion. We're horrified because something inside us screams, that's wrong. Objectively wrong.
Exactly. And that's the point Keller's making. That gut feeling, that deep-seated belief that the world should be a certain way, that cruelty and suffering are wrong, it points to a moral standard that can't be explained away by just looking at the natural world. It suggests there's a source beyond ourselves, a source of goodness and justice that we're hardwired to recognize.
So you're saying the very existence of evil, the fact that it horrifies us, could actually be like a backdoor argument for God, because it points to this moral standard that doesn't make sense in a purely materialistic worldview.
It's a bold claim, but it's one that both Keller and C.S. Lewis found incredibly convincing. And it leads to a really interesting thought. Turning away from God, it doesn't make the problem of suffering go away. It might even make it worse,
How so?
because it takes away any ultimate framework for making sense of it, for finding hope in the middle of it.
Okay, so we're getting into some deep stuff here. And intellectually, I find it fascinating. But I gotta be honest, it doesn't erase the very real pain that people experience. If someone's going through a serious illness, if they've lost someone they love, these intellectual arguments, as interesting as they are, they don't magically take that pain away. So where do we go from here? If we're wrestling with the why of suffering, what does the Christian faith really offer in those raw moments?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? I mean, we can debate philosophy all day long, but when you're the one hurting, it's different.
It really is. So what does faith have to offer when we're in those moments, the raw, painful ones?
This is where the Christian faith offers something truly unique and, to be honest, kind of radical.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's the idea of a suffering God.
That's not usually the first thing that comes to mind when I think about an all-powerful God. Why would God suffer?
It's a good question. And Keller, He digs into this by looking at Jesus and comparing him to other martyrs throughout history.
Mm.
He talks about Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. They were burned at the stake for their beliefs.
Wow.
Yeah, and as the flames were rising around them, Latimer, he says to Ridley, "Be of good comfort. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust never shall be put out." They face this unimaginable agony with incredible courage, even a sense of triumph.
They found strength in their faith, even facing death.
Absolutely. But then you read the accounts of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was crucified.
Yeah.
There's this stark contrast. Oh, yeah. The Gospels describe Jesus as deeply distressed and troubled, even saying, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." And on the cross, his cry of, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's raw, vulnerable. He doesn't exactly fit the picture of a stoic, triumphant martyr.
So what's the difference? Weren't Latimer and Ridley drawing on their faith too?
They were, but the Christian faith claims something more radical about Jesus. It claims he wasn't just a great teacher or a prophet, but God himself, who took on human flesh and experienced the full range of human emotions, including the depths of suffering.
So Jesus' cry on the cross, it wasn't just the cry of a man facing death, it was something deeper.
Much deeper. Many theologians believe that in that moment, Jesus, the Son of God, who had existed in perfect unity with God the Father for all eternity, he was experiencing the separation from God that our sin had caused. A separation so profound, so agonizing, it's beyond what we can even imagine.
Wow.
So in a very real way, God himself entered into the depths of human suffering. He experienced it fully, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. He knows our pain, not just intellectually, but experientially.
That's a powerful thought, and to be honest, kind of a heartbreaking one. But the Christian faith doesn't end with suffering, does it? There's also the hope of the resurrection.
Exactly, and it's not just about some ethereal afterlife. Keller points out that the Bible talks about a renewed heaven and earth, a restoration of all things, our physical bodies included. It's the ultimate, everything sad coming untrue.
You know, it makes me think of that line from Tolkien, The Return of the King, where Sam says, "I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue?" It's like this deep human longing for things to be made right, for suffering and loss to be redeemed.
And that's exactly what the Christian faith points to. Keller uses this really powerful analogy of waking up from a nightmare.
Yeah.
Imagine you dreamt you lost everyone you loved, and then you wake up. The relief is overwhelming, but it's more than that. Your love for those you thought you'd lost, it's magnified, intensified. It's like the nightmare, even though it was awful, it deepens your appreciation for what really matters.
So the resurrection, it's not that the bad stuff just disappears, but it somehow contributes to a greater joy, a deeper love, a more profound understanding of life and God's presence.
That's it. Dostoevsky says it beautifully. "I believe like a child that suffering will be healed and made up for, that in the world's finale, at the moment of eternal harmony, something so precious will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity, that it will make it not only possible to forgive but to justify all that has happened."
That's an amazing picture of hope. Like the darkness, even though it's painful, it actually makes the light that much brighter.
Exactly. C.S. Lewis said it this way: "They say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backward and turn even that agony into a glory."
Wow. It's a lot to take in, for sure. But it does offer a hopeful way to view suffering. Not to minimize the pain, but to acknowledge it, sit with it, while also holding on to this incredible promise of ultimate redemption. And, it makes you wonder, if everything sad really could come untrue, if those experiences could actually contribute to something so much greater than we can imagine, wouldn't that change how we face our own struggles and even the suffering we see all around us? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.